The kettle clicks off. I am already up when the heat kicks on with a tired sigh that never seems to last. I open the curtains to let in that first reluctant light and listen to the house wake. By the time I come out, I can hear Mark's voice, the one he uses when he wants to sound calm while sharpening a point. He is at the kitchen table by 6:30 every weekday. I head down the stairs slow and careful, the good knee first. It smells like coffee and toast and that lemon cleaner Linda buys in bulk. Linda stands at the counter making her smoothie. There's a stack of envelopes next to Mark's elbow and his laptop open to a spreadsheet. He gives me a brief nod that stops halfway between politeness and warning. "Morning, Dad," Linda says without turning. She leaves the blender jar in the sink. Mark slides a page from the stack and taps a number with the back of his pen. He says the electric spiked again for January. Gas, too. He says the utility company is gouging everyone, but that does not change the bill. I pull out a chair across from him and rest my hands on the cool table. I tell Mark that the week was cold. He says I know, and then he adds an explanation I do not need about peak demand and rate tiers. He looks to Linda for a second and then back at the bill. Linda sets the smoothie on the table and finally looks at me. She says that costs everywhere have gone up, and we all need to do our part. She reminds me that space heaters eat electricity and that the thermostat cannot be changed without talking to her, because the system works best if we keep it steady. I say I have not used a space heater. She says then it must be the television and the lights. I tell her I read most evenings. She says she believes me, and then she asks if I have my rent ready for this month. I say yes. She nods like a manager checking an item off a list. Mark flicks to another tab on his screen. He says property taxes in Essex County are not a joke, and the mortgage adjustment kicked in last quarter because insurance is up after those storms 2 summers ago. Linda takes a sip of her smoothie and then sets it down. She says Emma needs books this term, and we are helping a little because she had to cut her hours at the coffee shop. Mark leans back. He says we should talk about utilities again. He says a fair split would reflect usage. He suggests we could try a separate meter for the basement where my room is. Linda nods and says that sounds sensible. She says, "Dad, you are in the house most of the day, and it is only fair." Emma steps in from the hallway with her backpack on one shoulder. She says good morning and asks if I need anything from the store after class. Linda reminds her that she is covering the evening shift and should not be late. Emma nods and kisses her mother on the cheek. When she turns to leave, she squeezes my shoulder once. She is gone, and the door closes with a soft clap. Mark clears his throat. He says that would really help with forecasting. Linda adds that we are a household, and households work when everyone pulls together. She reaches for the stack of envelopes and shuffles them into an even pile. I open my wallet and take out the check I wrote last night. $2,000 in clean blue ink. I fill the memo line with the same word I always use: contribution. I lay the check on the table and slide it toward Linda. Then she takes it and places it on top of the stack. "Thank you, Dad," she says. "Mark says that covers the room and base utilities, and that we will review next month if rates move again. He says he appreciates my understanding." He stands, straightens his tie, and drapes his coat over his arm. He tells Linda he will see her tonight after his client dinner. Linda nods. When they both leave the kitchen, I sit for a minute longer. I rinse my mug and set it beside the sink to dry. I climb the stairs, slowly, listening to my steps, thinking about the drawer in my room where the worn manila folder sits under my socks. The folder smells like paper and a little like dust. It holds answers to questions no one in this kitchen has asked in years. In my room, the air is still and the radiator ticks as it cools. I sit on the edge of the bed again. Then I take out my phone and open the banking app. The screen is bright in the dim room. I transfer $2,000 from one account into another, as I always do on the first. The little confirmation appears. Payment sent. I put the phone down and listen. The house settles on its foundation, the way houses do when they are trying to look innocent. I lie back for a moment and stare at the hairline crack creeping toward the ceiling fixture. I tell myself that this will be an ordinary day. I say it twice in my head to see if it will stick. By the time I step outside, the walk takes me past the neighborhood finishing opening its eyes. In the afternoons, the house is quiet in a way that is not silence. Refrigerators breathe, a washing machine ticks the mail slot, coughs bills onto the entry rug. Linda is at the bank, and Mark is downtown at the firm, and Emma is on campus for a media lab. I fix a sandwich and take it at the counter because the table is set for dinner in a way that tells you who belongs and where. She asks how my day was without waiting, and I say it was good because there is no prize for being exact. She says we are doing pasta and salad because Emma has night class and Mark will be late. I slice the tomatoes. Mark texts that he will be home by 7 and that he needs to go over a few numbers about the utilities before the week is out. Linda reads the message and places the phone face down on the island. I say nothing and grate the cheese. At 6:30, the doorbell rings. Michael arrives. He hugs his sister. He pats my shoulder and says, "Hey, Dad." We eat. Michael talks about a driver who quit with 2 days' notice and a customer who wants Saturday pickups for weekday rates. He says payroll runs Friday and 3 invoices are stuck in the system, and if he does not cover the gap, 2 good men will bounce their rent. He says he only needs a short bridge for 10 days. He says Dad might be able to help just this once. He says these things, and he waits. I tell him I wish I could. I tell him the pension is steady but thin, and that between rent and the share of utilities and a few medical things, there is not a lot of room. He says he figured it was tight with prices the way they are. He says he will figure something out. He eats faster after that. Linda puts her napkin down and looks at me. She says there is something about the utilities while we are all here. Mark ran the numbers, and the fair thing is to add a flat 75 for gas on top of my share this month because of the cold snap. She says she has been covering the difference, but it cannot go on. She says she knows I understand. I say yes. The phone vibrates and displays Susan's name, and Linda answers on speaker because her hands are wet. Susan says her class is trying to fund a trip to the museum in the city, and the PTA is short because of a roof leak last fall, and she is thinking of asking family to help because it is for the kids. She says a small amount from each of us would get them over the hump. Linda says that is wonderful, and then without looking at me, she says, Dad may be able to contribute a little. I say I can see what is possible after the first of the month. Susan says, of course. Linda says thank you and calls her a lifesaver. Michael stares at his water glass. Emma arrives in a hurry and slides into the chair at the corner. She apologizes and says the lab ran late. She says she can eat fast and head back to campus for a screening. She asks what she missed, and Linda says nothing that cannot be summarized by the word expenses. We clear plates, and Linda hands me the dish towel, and I wipe while she washes. She says quietly that Mark is right about the separate meter, and that she hates feeling like a collection agent. I tell her she does a good job keeping a roof over everyone. She stops for a beat, and then says thank you. Michael lingers in the kitchen, and then makes his try again. He says, Dad, look, it would mean the world, and I swear I will have it back to you by the 10th. He names a number smaller than the one he named at the table. I do the arithmetic in my head. I tell him I cannot do it. I tell him I am sorry. He says he understands. Emma dries the last plate and leans against the counter. She asks if I want tea. I say yes, and she puts the kettle on. Linda draws a line through 2 items on the list on the fridge. The kettle takes its time. Emma sets the mug in front of me. She tells me she will be home around 9 if the screening does not run long. Linda reminds her to text. Emma nods and disappears in a scatter of keys. Mark comes in just as the kettle clicks off again. He kisses Linda on the temple and sets his briefcase by the chair. He sits, loosens his tie, and takes in the room with accountant eyes. He says he will do the utility breakdown this weekend, and he would like to move toward a single transfer on the 1st that includes the rent and my share, so the cash flow is clearer. He says it will reduce friction for everyone. I say I can do that. He smiles. He asks about Michael, and Linda tells him nothing new. He sighs and looks at his phone. When the kitchen empties, I wipe the table one more time for the sake of ritual. The night beyond the window has grown deep. I turn off the lights one by one because that is a habit I keep from a life spent chasing wasted watts. I pick up the envelopes and flip each one. The names are all correct. The numbers are heavy. I set them on the console for Linda to open in the morning, because order lives where she puts it. Upstairs, I take off my sweater and set it over the back of the chair and lower myself onto the bed. I hear Linda and Mark talking below, voices low and even. I hear the clink of a glass, the soft thud of a drawer, the street outside giving back its traffic in a slow taper. I reach for the lamp and leave it on for a minute longer than I need. Then I let the dark have the room. I wake before the house does, and let the dark finish its slow climb down the walls. There is a small sound in the pipes, a sigh in the radiators. I open the drawer where the manila folder lives under sweaters folded to pretend nothing important is beneath them. The folder is smooth with a little grit at the corners. I set it on the bed and sit. My hands still know what to do when a thing matters. First, the letter from the state lottery office, thick stock with state seal embossed like a thumbprint. I can see the outside of the Quick Check on Bloomfield Avenue, the glass door filmed by a day of fingerprints. I had just come off a double at the plant in Newark. On my way home, I bought a single ticket with cash and a black coffee I could have made better at home. The numbers hit on a Thursday. 10 seconds later, my hands were shaking so hard I had to sit on the step. Margaret came out with her hair still wet and a towel around her shoulders and asked if I felt all right. I showed her the numbers. We went to work. We did not tell the kids that week. We did not tell them the next week either. Margaret said, "Keep it simple and keep it quiet." Her voice was steady the way it got when she knew she was right. We met with a lawyer in a small office over a bakery in Caldwell. He explained taxes and the difference between taking a sum and taking a promise. We chose the lump. After taxes and fees, the number that found its way to our account was less than the one in the paper, and more than anything I had ever seen. We paid off what we owed. We fixed what was broken. We took one small trip to a lake in New Hampshire because Margaret wanted to see if the water really was that clear. Then we went home and kept going. The kids called when they called. Michael needed help with a down payment for a truck and got it. Linda wanted first and last month's rent when she moved to an apartment with washer and dryer, and I wrote a check. Susan asked for nothing that year. When Margaret got sick, the money kept the bills from turning into a second illness. The doctors were good. The nurses were better. We did treatments. In 2014, I pressed my face to her hand and listened to her breathing go from a tide to a whisper, and then to nothing. The kids were kind in a way that does not cost much time. They had jobs and young families, and a million good reasons to be somewhere else. I sold Grove Street and looked for a place that felt like a life I could live inside. Montclair was familiar and practical. I bought this house in 2011 when the price was $500,000, because Margaret liked the porch and the maple trees, and because the taxes made sense then. I put the deed in my name only, a decision born from a thing I had already learned. Money changes how people hear. A parent with money speaks into a wind that turns questions into expectations. The next document in the folder is the title policy, then the closing disclosure with the neat columns that add to an answer you cannot argue with. I run a finger down the numbers. Linda and Mark like to speak of the mortgage and the burden of insurance. The bank draft that pays the bank is theirs. The land under the house and the structure that holds it were bought outright. Under the property papers, there are account statements I print in case I ever need a piece of paper more than I need a screen. Certificates of deposit from the credit union. A savings account. After the house and the years and the bills, there is still a balance that would surprise a room full of people who think they know me. Enough to choose without asking permission. I fold the statements and lay them back. I take out the last thing and place it on top. It is a photograph of Margaret on the porch steps, the spring we moved in her hair in the wind, and a smile that lifts the day like a kite. She would have said, "This is a good house for what we need," and a responsible plan. And do not tell them yet because they will learn the wrong lesson. I put everything back in order and return the folder to its drawer. On my way to the kitchen, I stop in the hall where the family pictures run in tidy frames. You can read a history in the clothes and hair. There are 3 children in holiday reds, then 3 young adults at different commencements, then 2 weddings 1 summer apart, then babies who made all of us softer for a while. If you step close, you can see small tensions even in posed moments. The way Linda stands half a step forward. The set to Michael's jaw. I take my mug to the back door and look at the maple that guards the yard. I think about how secrets age. This one has become a key I keep in my pocket to warm with my hand until I am ready to turn it. Back in my room, I take the folder out once more because repetition is a way to prove a choice belongs to you. I slide the deed back into its sleeve and press the brass clasp until it clicks. A car door shuts outside. I hear Linda in the hall speaking into her phone in the quick, clipped tone she keeps for colleagues. I think about the dinner to come. I think about Michael and the payroll he cannot meet, and Susan and the field trip she should fund without my name. All of it sits on one side of a scale, and on the other side is a slim folder that weighs more than anyone in this house imagines. I put the folder away for the second time and close the drawer with a palm that feels steadier than it did when the morning began. The day waits. There is a list on the dresser for groceries, and a short walk on the plane, and a phone number written on a small card from a man who sells houses for a living, tucked behind the clock, where no one ever dusts. The number used to be an idea. It has become a possibility. I touch the edge of the card and let my hand fall. Mark gets home before the sky makes up its mind about the light. He says we should sit down for a minute after dinner because there are a few numbers to go over. Linda does not look up from the salad she's rinsing. She says yes, of course, and moves the bowl to the towel. We eat roasted chicken and potatoes. Emma is still at campus. Mark lets the conversation warm just enough to pretend there is no purpose to it, and then he takes out a printout from his briefcase and sets it between the salt and the pepper. He turns the page so it faces me. He says this is the last 3 months on gas and electric and water, and the trend is not our friend. He taps a rising line with the back of his pen. He says insurance is up again after the storms, and the mortgage adjuster does not work for free. He looks at Linda, and she gives him the smallest nod. Linda folds her napkin into a clean square and places it to the left of the plate. She says we have to be realistic. She says costs are not what they were before the pandemic, and they may never be again. She says when we took you in, we agreed to a number that made sense at the time, but nothing stands still. She says the only fair thing is to raise your contribution by $500 starting next month. She says that still does not truly cover your share of the house, but it will keep us from falling behind. I reach for my water and put it down without drinking. Mark says he knows it is not pleasant, but the math is the math. He says to make it simple, we can roll everything into one transfer on the first. Rent plus utilities. One number, clean, predictable. He says predictability is a gift to a household. I tell them I appreciate the way they manage. I say the pension is what it is, and there is not much stretch left after the 2,000, and my portion of the bills and the doctor visits. I say I can keep making my payments on time exactly the way we agreed, but 500 more is not something I can do. Linda tips her head in a way that says she saw this coming. She says we all tighten belts. Mark leans in with the even tone he uses when he wants to make gravity sound polite. He says there is also the thermostat. He says the most efficient plan is to set it and leave it. He says the separate meter is still on the table if we need to get precise. I tell them I wear sweaters and keep the lights off when the sun is up, and take my walks to warm my legs when the heat has not caught up to the hour. I say I do not waste. She says it is not about waste. She says it is about fairness. She says, Dad, you have to carry yours. I say again that I cannot make 500 happen. I say I am sorry. Mark sits back and crosses his arms. He says this is not sustainable. He says there are decisions we will have to make about what we can afford under this roof. Linda pushes her chair back and stands. She turns around and says, Dad, you are just freeloading off us. She does not raise her voice so much as focus it. The word sits between us. I reach for the water again, and this time I drink. Mark murmurs, Linda. She ignores him. She says we work every hour we can find. We keep this place running. We pay for everything. She says, and you sit here and refuse to do your part. I want to tell her about years that began in the dark and ended in the dark with a lunch pail between them. I want to tell her about the way a plant sounds at 2 in the morning when the grid has an ache that needs a certain hand. I want to tell her about a porch where her mother once stood and chose kindness. Instead, I say I will keep paying what I have always paid. I say I am not able to do more. I say I am sorry to cause trouble in her home. Mark says perhaps we should revisit this with the actuals in front of us. He says he can build a model with month-to-month inputs so we can all see the picture. He says if something changes on my end, we can adjust. Linda stares at me. Emma comes in and stops just inside the doorway. She looks at the table and reads the air. She says she can eat later. Linda says no, we are done. She takes the plates. Mark collects his printout and slides it into his case. He says we will circle back once he runs the utility assumptions. He says we can revisit the 500 in a week. Emma follows me into the hallway, while Linda runs water and sets plates in the rack. Emma speaks low. She asks if I am all right. I tell her I am fine. She squeezes my hand and lets go quickly. I take my coat and step out onto the porch. The maple is a black web against a sky that cannot choose between blue and steel. Across the street, Mrs. Donnelly drags a trash can to the curb and waves. I wave back. I stand there long enough for my fingers to ache, and then I go back inside. In the kitchen, Linda has moved on to lunches for tomorrow. Mark is at the table making a small stack of forms. I say softly that I am going to turn in. Linda says, "Sleep well." Mark says, "Good night, Dad." In my room, I hang my coat on the chair and sit on the bed. I take the small card from behind the clock and hold it in my palm. The numbers are neat and black and ordinary. I place the card back where it was and turn off the light and lie down. The warmth in the blankets finds me slowly. Tomorrow will come with its own chores and its own requests. I let the dark take the room. Morning spreads itself thin over Montclair, and I step out with my gloves in my pocket and my hands bare to wake them. Valley Road is already busy with people who have places to be and reasons to talk into the air. I take the long way toward Edgemont Park because the pond will tell me what the sky intends before the forecast makes up its mind. Two women pass me just outside the playground, coats buttoned to their chins, coffee cups steaming. One says there were 6 cars lined up before the open house, and the agent ran out of shoe covers. The other says it is all bidding wars again, and that she told her cousin not to wait for spring. On the way back, I cut down a side street I do not use often. There is a fresh sign in a tidy lawn, the kind that wants you to believe all things are possible if you call a number and let a stranger into your living room. I went, because Margaret used to say there is no such thing as a wasted hour in a library. One of those cards is the one that lives behind my clock. She sees me and asks if I am here for the preview. I tell her I live nearby and I am only curious about how they handled a narrow lot. The entry is a cousin to my own. I move through the rooms with my hands behind my back the way my father taught me to move in places that are not mine. I thank the agent and step outside. A man from 2 streets over is studying the sign with a look that says he wants to be informed more than he wants to move. He says the market is back to its old tricks. I tell him I remember other cycles, and he laughs and says, "We are all metting to son to keep track of them." The walk home feels shorter because a thought has its own way of taking distance out of a street. The mail slot coughs and a glossy card slides onto the rug. Free valuation for Montclair homeowners. No obligation. I pick it up and look at the smiling faces that sell certainty for a living. She sees the glossy card on the console, and her mouth flattens as if junk mail offends her on a personal level. She says the neighborhood is crawling with agents again, and that every sale means the assessor will sharpen his pencil. She flips the card over and frowns at the promise of easy answers. Linda moves the card to the recycling, and then changes her mind and sets it with the other papers to review. I make us both a sandwich, and we eat standing at the counter because she needs to be back at the branch within the hour. She asks if Emma mentioned changing her major, and I say we did not talk about that. When she leaves, she takes the stack of mail and the glossy card. I wait until the door closes, and then I take the card from the stack and slide it under the phone book. It is not a deception so much as a delay. In the afternoon, I sweep the walk where the maple has dropped the last of its thin brown cutters. Mrs. Donnelly waves from across the street and says the town sent a notice about a meeting on trash pickup schedules and can she leave it in our mailbox. I say yes, and she says, "Thank you, dear." And the word dear lands without a sting because she is 70 and has earned the right to use it. Just before dusk, I walk back to the side street with the new sign. The open house is over. The agent is locking the front door and tucking her scarf into her coat. She sees me and smiles with professional brightness that softens at the edges when she recognizes the old man from the morning. I fold it once and slide it into my coat pocket. On the corner, a man in a gray cap steps out of a sedan and nods to the agent. I keep walking so I do not look like a man storing someone else's calendar in his head. Back home, I set the flyer on my desk where the lamp pools yellow light into a circle. I do not study the price because the agent did not print it. I run a finger over the words that describe the house in polite adjectives. The house is quiet. Linda and Mark will be later than usual. Emma texted that she is at the library and that she will bring milk on the way home. I take the phone book and the glossy card from under it and consider the names. One belongs to the man at the library with the calm blazer. Another is from a firm that talks louder. I set them side by side and wait to see if one of them will speak first. The clock in my room ticks with the steady patience of a thing that has only one job. I put both cards in the drawer with the folder where the deed sleeps. Outside, a train hums past and fades. I take a long breath and stand. The porch light will need a new bulb before the weekends. There is always a list in a house and always a man to carry it if he knows where to look. In the kitchen, I fill the kettle and set it on the burner and watch the blue ring begin its low sing. I look out at the maple and the dim lamps on the block, and I think about what neighbors know and what they guess. I think about cycles and signs and the way a simple conversation can press a thought into shape. I pour the water over a bag of tea and let it sit until the color is strong and the steam has the right smell. When the front door opens later and the small storms of other people's days blow in with them, I will have nothing to report. I will set the mug down and ask about traffic and listen to answers that list streets and lights. I will keep the card and the flyer and the idea to myself because ideas liked to ripen without witnesses. The night settles its weight evenly over the roof. I take a sip and it warms my chest. Some choices announce themselves with trumpets. Some arrive like a neighbor at the fence and talk until you realize you have been listening for years. Emma comes home late, the door easing shut the way it does when she tries not to wake anyone. I am at the stove coaxing steam from a small pot, the kitchen light, a soft island in the dark. She drops her backpack on the chair and leans both hands on the counter, as if the day has a weight she can finally set down. She asks if I am up because I could not sleep. I tell her the kettle, and I keep similar hours. She smiles with one side of her mouth and says she will take tea if there is enough. I say we had one of those practical conversations about money that never ends. She says, "Did Mom push again?" I tell her her mother is very good at following numbers to the conclusion they prefer. Emma breathes out and shakes her head. She says she wishes Mom would hear herself. She says the word fairness has turned hard in this house. I tell her I will be fine. She asks if I remember Nana scolding her for leaving crayons on the porch. I tell Emma her grandmother believed in order because it made room for kindness. She says her media professor assigned a piece on dignity and agency, and the class argued about who gets to claim them. I ask about school to move the air around us. She smiles again and the room warms. She asks if I ate. I say yes. Then she goes quiet. After a moment, she says she heard part of what Mom said earlier. I do not ask which part. She asks what I want, not what everyone else wants, not what feels possible, just the plain thing in my chest, if all the noise stopped. I tell her I want to be treated like a person, not an invoice. I tell her I want to choose my heat without apology and to use a lamp in the afternoon without a speech. I tell her I want quiet rooms and a Sunday that belongs to me. She asks if I have thought about living somewhere else. I say a move at my age is not a small thing. I say people cling to familiar corners for good reasons. I tell Emma I appreciate her seeing me. She says she always has. She says if I ever need help with anything, moving boxes or reading a contract or just sitting next to me while a person in a blazer explains something in a careful voice, she is here. I say I might ask you to keep one. I do not whisper. I tell her there are papers I keep in my room that matter, and I may need to meet with a professional who knows how to turn papers into decisions without a parade. She stands and sets her mug in the sink. She says I am not alone, not now, not in the part that counts. We talk a while longer about small things to cool the heat of the big ones. I tell her about the old man who used to tune turbines by ear and how he could hear a fault before the instruments did. Emma checks her phone and winces at the time. She says she should sleep if she is going to like herself in the morning. I tell her I know. She kisses my cheek and disappears down the hall that leads to the life she is building. I rinse my cup and place it on the rack. The house hums with the quiet noises it makes when it is pleased to be left alone. The card sits where I left it behind the clock. I take it out and sit on the bed and let the black letters steady my hand. The call connects on the second ring. A calm voice says a name I recognize from the library workshop. I tell him my own name and where I live, and that I would like to discuss a private valuation and possible sale with as little fuss as the law allows. I tell him I prefer to keep my involvement quiet for now because of family dynamics. He says he can meet me tomorrow morning at a diner on Bloomfield Avenue and we can talk through options. He says he can pull recent sales tonight and bring a set of comps and a list of steps so I can see the road before I walk it. I say, thank you. He gives me a time that sounds reasonable and writes my number down. We end the call. I tuck the card back behind the clock and slide the drawer open where the folder rests. I do not take it out. Do not take it. I let the knowledge of it be enough. In the hall, I hear Linda moving toward bed, the light steps of a woman who will put out every small fire before she sleeps. I say goodnight back, and my voice surprises me by sounding steady. When the house goes still, I turn off the lamp and lie back. The dark presses close without feeling heavy. My breath finds an easy pace. I close my eyes and hold the picture of a small diner booth and a clean sheet of paper sliding across a table. I allow myself the smallest slice of relief, not for what I have done, but for finally admitting to myself that I will do it. The diner on Bloomfield has a tired chrome edge that reflects a morning thin as skim milk. I slide into a booth that knows more secrets than most churches. The server leaves a menu I will not open. A man with careful hair and a navy blazer sets a leather folder on the table and holds out his hand. He says his name and I find that it fits. He lays out a neat stack of papers. Recent sales on my block. He points to one near the park and another closer to the train. He says the market has shrugged off its nap. If the house shows clean and bright, we can enter the field near 890 and expect movement without dragging our feet. I tell him I want to be quick and quiet. I tell him there are family dynamics that make a parade unwise. He nods. He says we can list under a trust to keep my name out of early chatter. He knows an attorney who can draft a simple, revocable trust and a deed transfer that does not kick the beehive. He says showings can be private and scheduled while the house is naturally empty. I say a trust with my initials sounds fine. I say the fewer footsteps, the better. He sets a timeline on the table that looks like a short track with clear lanes. Attorney consultation today by phone. Photographer tomorrow afternoon. Listing live Friday. Private preview for a short list of buyers the following week. I read it twice and feel my chest lift and settle. He asks about access. I tell him I can provide a key and that mornings are clear while Linda is at the bank and Mark is downtown and Emma is on campus. I tell him I prefer no weekend traffic. He says he can make that work. He asks about condition. I walk him through the work I have kept up quietly. Roof in solid shape since 2015. Water heater younger than Emma. Electrical healthy because I would never live under anything else. He asks about the porch paint, and I tell him the salt has had its way with it, but not enough to speak loudly. The attorney joins us by phone at the end of the meeting, a clear voice that keeps sentences short. He says we can create a simple trust that holds title for the next few months. He says I can be trustee and beneficiary, which means control never leaves my hand. He says the listing can show the trust as seller, and my personal name only appears at the right moment with the right papers. He says he can file the deed within 3 business days. I say do it. We shake hands at the curb outside the diner. He takes the folder. The second card carries a date and time in firm blue ink for the photographer and a note that reads back entrance at 11:30. He asks for a minimum number I will accept if an early offer lands clean. I do the math out loud for both of us. $860 cash with a short closing and possession no later than 30 days. He says he has that buyer on his list. He says he will call if he needs a fast yes. I tell him he will have it. The walk home through Montclair feels like a corridor I have dressed for the last time. The door gives under my hand, as it always does. I hang my coat and head for my room because the drawer will need opening and the old folder must be joined by a new one. The attorney calls at noon. He confirms the trust name we agreed upon. He spells it, and I repeat it so we both hear the same letters. He says a courier will bring signature pages this afternoon. I ask if we can keep records off the kitchen table. He says the courier will meet me on the porch. He says I will need a notary. He can send one who will come to the house on the hour. I say yes. Then he says a thing that I did not know I needed to hear. He says this is my right. Emma texts to ask if I need anything from the store. I write back milk and a box of tea, and I add a thank you. Linda calls to say she is working late and to leave the mail on the console for her to review. She asks if Mark reached me about the utility model. I tell her no. She says he will. At 1, the courier arrives with a small black case and a notary who carries her seal in a tidy pouch the size of a wallet. We work on the porch with the door closed. Pens move. Pages turn. She stamps 2 pages. When they leave, I stand for a moment with the folder under my palm. At 2, the agent calls. He says the photographer will arrive at 11:30 tomorrow through the back gate. He asks me to tuck away personal photographs and any medicine bottles. He says a vase on the table helps and a bowl of green apples if I have one. I say we have a bowl and a store on the corner. He asks about key access. I give him the extra key that lives under a tape roll in my desk drawer. He slides it into a small envelope and writes the trust name on the front. I walk the rooms in the late afternoon and remove the things that speak of me too loudly. The photo of Margaret on the porch steps goes into the drawer for now. On the nightstand, I leave only a book and a small lamp that flatters the shade of the wood. In the living room, I fold the throw that Emma curls under and set it neatly on the arm. I cook an easy supper. Mark gets home first and says he will run the model later. He says we will need to reach agreement soon. I tell him I am sure we will. Linda arrives with a sigh born in traffic. She asks if any deliveries came. I say just flyers and coupons and the trash notice from the town. Emma is at the library. After we eat, Linda clears her plate and stands at the console to sort the mail. She flips each envelope with quick fingers. Nothing matters enough to slow her down. She gathers the stack she wants and carries it to the table where Mark has spread his spreadsheets. They talk numbers. I listen and stand to make tea. When the kitchen is clean and the lights are low, I step onto the back stoop and look at the maple. I think of the trust bearing its quiet new name, and of the key in the envelope, and of a camera that will see my rooms tomorrow in their best light. I think of Margaret in that first spring, and of Emma with her chin on my shoulder, saying I am not alone. I go back inside and close the door softly. My room holds its usual shadow and lamp. I set the new folder beside the old one and rest my palm on both. I turn off the lamp and sit on the edge of the bed while my eyes adjust. In the center of my chest, there is a feeling that is not triumph and not fear. It is the simple relief of a man who has signed his name to his own next step. By late afternoon, Linda moves through the house with a purpose. She tells me we are having everyone because it is easier to talk once than 3 times. Mark comes in early with a folder. He asks about my day, and I tell him I took a walk and read the paper. Michael arrives with a grin. He takes a seat opposite me. Susan is last. She kisses Linda on the cheek and rests a paper envelope beside her water glass. She says receipts, Dad, just to keep things clean. Emma slips in quietly. She presses my hand under the edge where no one will notice. For a few minutes, there is genuine peace. Then Mark lays the folder open and says he has updated the analysis. Linda says we have talked and it is time to settle this. She says starting next month, the total should be $2,500 on the first one, transfer rent and utilities. She says if this does not work, we need to look at other housing solutions for me, so we are not in this loop each week. Michael says fairness is fairness. He looks at me and says, there is always a way to find room if you really want to. Susan says the errands take time and gas. She says she kept receipts this month so I could see, and she would appreciate a small reimbursement. I tell them the pension is fixed, and I already moved as much as I can move. I say I will keep my word on the $2,000 and utilities, and I pay them on time, and if there is a true emergency, I will do what I can. I say $2,500 is not possible. Linda says we took you in because you needed us. She says we have never asked you for more than your fair share. Her mouth tightens. She says, Dad, you are acting like a freeloader, and it is humiliating for everyone. Susan looks up with a teacher face. I take a slow breath and picture Margaret at the porch rail. I tell them I do not need a separate meter to know I do not waste. I say I walk to get warm, and I sit by a window to read. I say I do not run lights to feel rich. I say again that I will keep paying what I pay. Linda shakes her head. She says you cannot keep living here on your terms. She says this is our home and we set the rules. She says if you cannot do the number, then you should look for a place that fits your budget. Emma sets her napkin down and speaks softly. She says maybe we can give it a month and look again. Emma says respect goes both ways. Michael lists the costs that make men feel smaller than they meant to be. Fuel insurance, payroll, repairs. He says he is drowning. I nod because drowning is a language I know. I look at the neat blue ink on the front where Susan has written my name and hers. I push the envelope back. I say I appreciate the errands. I say there is pie in the freezer you like. Linda stands and gathers plates. Emma stares at the table. Michael says he should go. The door closes. The house settles into the version of quiet where the refrigerator breathes louder than it should. Linda turns back to me. She says she cannot keep having this same conversation. She says she is doing everything she can, and I make it harder. She says we cannot afford to carry me. I stand because sitting makes it feel like the chair has accepted all this on my behalf. I tell her I heard her. I tell her I will not be the reason she paces at night. I tell her I will handle my part. Emma looks up, and for a second her face is so open it hurts. I rinse my plate and set it on the rack. In my room, the lamp makes a small lake of light. On the desk, the envelope with the key sits in the folder with the new trust name on the front. I take the photo of Margaret from the drawer, look at her a long time, and then lay it face down again. I send the agent a short message to confirm the time. He replies within a minute, confirmed, and he thanks me for the access. I sit on the edge of the bed and lace my fingers together and let the air move in and out until my chest feels like it belongs to me. In the hall, I hear Emma pause outside my door and then keep going. The day is done. The next one has its own list. Morning comes with a clean edge and the back gate clicks. The photographer steps in with a small case and a quiet hello. He walks the rooms, moves a chair, a hand width, turns a shade one notch, straightens the bowl of apples. The camera whispers and the house performs. In the kitchen, the steam from the kettle lifts like a veil. By noon, the agent calls. He says the photos play like music and that he has already scheduled 2 quiet previews for tomorrow while the house is empty. The listing will go live at 4. He says a new couple moving from the city has asked for a first look. I tell him yes. He says he will call after the last showing with a report. Linda texts from the branch about dinner, and I say pasta is fine. Mark sends a note that he will be late and to keep the folder near the table. At 5, the agent calls again. He says a cash buyer has made a clean offer at $860 with a closing in 3 weeks. He says we can accept tonight or wait. I tell him I am ready now. He says he will send the acceptance and call the attorney. He asks if I want him to handle notifying the occupants. I say yes, and I say I will be in the room. He arrives at 7 with a slim folder. Mark comes in just behind him, fatigue under his eyes. Linda invites him to the dining room. We sit. He explains that the property is under contract through a trust that represents the seller and that the buyers require possession at closing in 3 weeks. He says a formal notice will follow, but he is here as a courtesy. Linda asks how there can be a contract when the landlord has not discussed anything with her. She says they have always paid on time and have kept the property well. She asks for the landlord's name so she can discuss an extension. Mark begins to ask about tenancy protections and whether there is a lease on file. The agent says the trust is within its rights to sell and to deliver at closing. He says a relocation notice with 30 days from closing is customary. He says the buyers would prefer not to delay, but he will deliver any request we wish to make. Linda shakes her head. She says there must be a mistake. She says she knows the landlord is local because payments have always posted same day. She says there is no way a sale could be this far along without notice. She says she has rights. Mark asks the agent for the trust name so he can look up the filing. The agent gives it. Mark types it into his phone and frowns at what he finds. Linda demands the landlord's contact so she can fix this. The agent begins to repeat the trust language and then stops because he sees my face. I set my hands on the table. I tell Linda there is no landlord she can call. I tell her that the house is mine and has been for 14 years. I say the trust is mine and the decision is mine, and that I have sold the property under terms that require us to deliver it empty. For a second, no one moves. Linda looks at me as if I have borrowed her face and am not using it correctly. She says, "What?" The agent slides a single sheet forward that shows the trust as seller and a summary of terms. He says counsel will send formal notice tomorrow. Linda stares at the page. She says you have been taking our money. She blinks as if the lights have flickered. She says, "Dad." Emma moves closer. Mark asks the agent to give us the room, and he nods and steps into the hall. The three of us remain at the table with the sheet. I tell them the money they have taken each month has been a contribution I chose not to correct. I tell them I knew if I announced ownership, it would change the shape of every conversation. I tell them I want to live without being measured for my wattage and my warmth. I want rooms that do not charge me for turning on a lamp. I want the rest of my years not feeling like an expense on a ledger I never agreed to. Linda rubs at a spot on the table. She says you lied to us for years. She says we built our budget on numbers that included you. She says you are choosing strangers over family. Mark says there will be legal aspects to consider, then stops. Emma asks what the closing date will be. The agent answers from the hall. 3 weeks from Friday. She nods and looks at me. She says we will need boxes. The agent steps back into the room. He says he will leave us to our evening and that he will email formal details and next steps. He leaves through the same door he entered. Linda stands. She says she will never forgive this. She walks to the sink and runs the water and then turns it off. Mark closes his eyes and opens them. Emma stays very still. I sit and listen to the heater knock twice and settle. The attorney's email lands at 7 with the firmness of a train schedule. He lays out the dates in plain words and confirms what the agent said last night. Closing in 3 weeks. Possession at closing. Linda moves through the kitchen with the exactness of a person balancing a full glass. Mark comes in with his tie already respectful of the day and says he would like to review the email together. He suggests we speak to an attorney about options that could give everyone flexibility. I tell him the buyers required possession at closing and that I agreed. He says sometimes terms can be amended. Emma asks if there is a box cutter in the junk drawer. Linda stiffens and asks why we need box cutters already. Emma says slowing down is how people end up in the same fight for 10 years. At 10, the door swings open, and Michael brings a gust of street air and the smell of diesel. He does not sit. He asks if this is a joke we plan to sell. He asks why I cannot cancel. He asks why a buyer matters more than family. I tell him the contract is binding and that I stand by it. He tells me I am throwing his sister into chaos. He names men he knows who can move furniture cheap. Linda sets a stack of plates on the counter. I tell Michael to save his voice for the call, where he asks a customer for a better rate and gets it. He leaves in a hurry that forgets to shut the door. The notary arrives at noon. We work on the porch. Mark steps out and asks a question about the mechanics of notice. The notary answers calmly. Susan comes after school. She places a manila folder on the table and spreads sheets she has printed. Budget templates, moving checklists, phone numbers for storage. She says we can do this in steps and names them without urgency. She suggests a family workday on Sunday. Emma takes the list and photographs it with her phone. She says she can pick up boxes behind the bookstore on Valley Road. She says she can borrow a van from a friend if we decide it makes sense. In the afternoon, Mark calls a lawyer he knows. He says the law is clear. He says the trust owns title and can deliver possession at closing and that any grace will be voluntary. I tell him the buyers were explicit. He says then it is what it is. Linda asks about the balance of the utilities and wants to know how we will handle final bills. She asks me to write down the accounts I pay from so she can separate them cleanly. I nod and write where it matters. I take my walk because the body needs its mile the way a clock needs its wind. At the bakery, the owner asks if I want the day-old loaf, and I say yes. Back home, I open the closet and begin the job that makes endings real, shirts in a stack that is smaller than I thought. Emma knocks softly and asks if she can come in. She sees the tokens and smiles in a way that understands without explanation. Linda hovers in the hall and asks if I want the blue quilt or if she should send it to Goodwill. I tell her keep it. She nods once and leaves with it folded in both arms. At dusk, the agent calls. He says the buyers have scheduled their inspector for early next week. He says the attorney served notice and that it was received. Mark says he will switch the insurance to a month-to-month plan for the last stretch and cancel after closing. He says he will set the final utility raid 2 days before the date. I carry 2 boxes to the corner of my room and write the contents on the top. Books for the next place. Emma texts from the next room that the bookstore has 20 boxes and they will hold them until morning. I write back that I will be ready. I sit on the bed with my hands on my knees and let the quiet tell me what it knows. The next 3 weeks will be a kind of weather. People will say things they do not completely mean and mean things they would not have said last month. Boxes will multiply and the house will reveal its true size once the furniture leaves. The train down the block lifts and falls again, and I find my breath in that rhythm. I will keep going until the door closes behind me because sometimes the only proof a person needs is that he can walk himself to the end of his own hallway. The last week moves like a careful truck through a narrow street. Boxes line the hall. The buyers send an inspector who arrives with a flashlight and a polite smile and leaves an hour later with nothing dramatic to report. The agent thanks me and says we are set. Linda spends nights at the kitchen table with lists that refuse to shrink. Mark calls numbers and moves dates around as if a calendar might forgive him. Michael drops by twice with promises of muscle and a truck if we need it. Susan brings tape and a marker and prints labels in her neat school hand. I clear my room of what does not wish to come. I pack the photograph of Margaret between 2 towels because some things deserve more than paper. 2 days before closing, the buyers walk through with the agent. I step outside while they move from room to room. They thank me when they leave and say the house feels kind. I stand on the porch until their car turns the corner, and then I go inside and sit on the bottom step. Linda is colder but calmer. She has found a townhouse on the Verona line and a landlord who likes clean application packages. Mark has arranged a short overlap so they do not move in the dark. On the last night, I sleep on the mattress set on the floor because the frame left earlier with a friend who wanted it. I wake before the light and sit on the edge of the mattress and listen to the house think. It creaks once, then goes still. At 9, I lock the back door one more time and slip the key into my pocket. Emma pulls up and we load the last boxes in steady passes. She does not say much. Linda watches from the porch for a long minute, and then steps down and takes a small box from my hands without looking at me. She says the new place will want these. Her voice is careful and flat. The title office on Bloomfield has a closer who lays out the documents like a dealer with a decent hand. I sign the papers that transfer a trust, and then I sign my own name to places that make it final. The closer hands me a small envelope for the keys, and I set Linda's copy on the table and slide the rest to the agent. He says the buyers will swing by after lunch to take a first look as owners. Emma walks beside me toward the van. She asks how I am, and I tell her I am mostly empty with a quiet spot where relief is beginning to sit. We drive to a low brick building on the edge of town where the superintendent knows my name. I signed a lease last week after the inspection, a 1-bedroom with a view of a maple that is younger than mine by a lifetime. The apartment smells like new paint and clean floor. I put the first box on the counter and open it because opening the first box is its own small ceremony. I slide the photograph of Margaret onto the shelf by the window, and the room becomes a place. We eat sandwiches on the floor. I tell her I have a simple list: a chair that lets an old back be good, a table that can hold a Sunday paper without crowding the coffee, a lamp that does not pretend to be art. In the afternoon, we drive back to the old house for a final sweep. Linda is in the living room with a stack of mail. She does not look up. Mark says the final read is set, and that the insurance will cancel at noon tomorrow. He looks at me for a second longer than necessary, and then he says, "Take care of yourself." Care. Michael claps my shoulder and says we will be fine. Susan hugs me with a care that avoids the ribs and sets a bag of cookies in my hand. Emma stays close. I walk through the rooms one last time. In the kitchen, I run a cloth over the counter for no reason, except that it is what I have always done. In the hall, I touch the frame where height marks once lived before the paint erased them. At the door, Linda finally turns and looks at me. Her face is tired in a way I do not know how to fix. She says this could have gone another way. I tell her perhaps. She says, "Be well." I say the same. We do not say more because more would be less right now. Emma drives me back to the apartment and helps carry up the last box. She says she will be back tomorrow with a lamp and a small plant, because every place deserves a living thing. She tells me her internship advisor reached out and that a summer spot might open at a public radio station in the city. She says she should say yes. I tell her she should. When she leaves, the apartment holds its breath and then lets it out. I put on water for tea and sit in the chair that came with the lease. The chair is not much, but the steam from the cup is exactly what steam should be. The phone on the counter lights with a message from the agent. Closing recorded. Congrats. I set the phone face down and let the news find its level inside me. I place the photograph of Margaret where the last light can touch it. I tell her with my eyes what the day has been, and she answers with that old steady smile that promised nothing and kept everything. When the tea is done, I wash the cup and leave it by the sink. The night outside grows honest. I sit on the edge of the bed and feel the old body take its inventory and decide it can do another day. The keys on the counter look smaller now that they belong only to me. I think about the train 3 streets over and decide I will learn its schedule the way I learned the last one. I turn off the lamp and let the room hold me. I breathe, and it feels like my breath. The first Sunday in the new place begins with the scrape of a shovel on the sidewalk below and the soft tick of the baseboard, heat catching up with the morning. Sun finds its way across the floor and stops at the rug like a dog that has learned where it is allowed. The chair I ordered from the small shop on Bloomfield arrived yesterday, and my back forgives me for every decision that led to it. A knock at the door brings a neighbor with a plant wrapped in white paper. She introduces herself as Mrs. Rivera from down the hall and says the super told her an older gentleman moved in, and she believes in welcoming people the way she was once welcomed. Midweek, I meet the attorney in a small office near Church Street. We set up a trust in Emma's name that will grow while she finishes school and wait for her to turn the key when she is ready. We create a scholarship with Margaret's name on it at the elementary school where she taught so long ago. Emma visits on Fridays with a bag of groceries and a new story from campus. She tells me the radio station downtown offered her a summer internship. She says pay is small and hours are real, and she is thrilled and terrified in equal parts. I tell her those are good signs. She asks if I will ride the train with her the first day, and I tell her yes. Linda calls and says the townhouse is livable, and the landlord prefers tenants who answer emails in complete sentences. She says taxes will be different this year, and asks if I kept copies of certain bills. I tell her I did, and that I can drop them by or leave them in an envelope at the bank. She chooses the bank. Michael stops by without warning with the smell of grease and wind on his jacket. He talks about routes and fuel and a driver who quit on a Tuesday. He says a short-term bridge could keep him from slashing his roots and that he will pay it back. I tell him I will not do that again. I tell him I can pay for a session with a business counselor at the chamber in town, and I can sit with him while he builds a plan. He leaves with a wave that avoids the eyes. Susan tells me she is proud of Emma, and proud that I am doing this next part with more grace than most. She tells me she used to worry I would never choose myself. I take the train with Emma on her first day at the station. We watch New Jersey slide past, like a film that knows its best angles. At the station, she leads me through the lobby and up to a glass door, where a guard nods and a producer with tired eyes but kind hands shakes hers and says, "Welcome." On a clear afternoon, I take a slow walk past the old street. A dog believes every passerby is a friend who has simply forgotten their name. I learn the names of two more neighbors. Mr. Patel in 3B, who argues happily with a chess app, and Grace on the second floor, who teaches piano to children who practice in bursts that wash up and fade like small waves. One evening the phone rings, and it is Linda. She says Emma read her a line from a piece she is writing at the station, and Linda could hear Margaret in the way our girl held a thought to the light. She says maybe everyone got what they needed in a way no one would have chosen. I tell her maybe. She says she will bring coffee next week because the branch is near my building on Thursdays. Not everyone has a place to tell their story. But if you're listening to this and see a piece of your own life in it, leave a mark. Like, comment, and share so we can keep these good stories alive. Hit subscribe and let's walk this road together.